Why did Japan attack Pearl Harbor? Welcome to Get Educated. Friends, today we are going to talk about an event in world history which not only changed the direction of World War II, but also transformed the nature of modern world politics. This is the story of the attack on the important American naval base Pearl Harbor. The importance of this surprise attack by the Imperial Japanese Navy on December 7, 1941 is because in response to this, America waged war against Japan and it was included in World War II. America's jump in World War II proved historic because it turned the direction of World War II in favor of the Allied powers. Not only this, the attack on Pearl Harbor is often also the reason for the beginning of the nuclear age. Because this event gave some wind to the fire between Japan and America that it was extinguished after the nuclear attack in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So let's see why a small island nation like Japan attacked such a terrifying attack on the world power like America. The attack on Pearl Harbor. Friends, this is the story of July 1941 when Japan was planning a combined attack on the Indies, Philippines, and Pearl Harbor. The then Navy Chief of Staff Osamu Nagano of Japan believed that war with America was inevitable and this war had to be fought as long as the existing oil resources were there. The Japanese Imperial Navy ordered an armada which included 414 aircraft on 6 aircraft carriers. According to Admiral Yamamoto Isoroku's plan, this armada was going to destroy the U.S. Pacific Fleet based in Pearl Harbor. The aircraft carriers maintained a strict radio silence so that the Americans could not detect anything. And Japan did this attack before any formal declaration of war. 30 minutes before the attack, it had sent a notice to America. But by the time it reached the High Command, it was too late. Anyway, it was Sunday morning. The date was December 7, 1941. At around 7:30 a.m., the first wave of Japanese aircraft attacked Pearl Harbor. After this, the Japanese continued to drop bombs on the American Navy for 2 hours in a row. That day, no American aircraft carrier or submarine was present at Pearl Harbor. But in this attack, 8 American battleships and 188 aircraft were destroyed. More than 2,000 Americans were killed, including the forces and civilians, and more than 1,000 were injured. Now you can understand that due to this massive casualty, America had to join the war. Anyway, in this attack, Japan also lost its 55 airmen and 9 submariners. Now let's understand why Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. Friends, to understand the Pearl Harbor attack, we first have to understand its relations with Imperial Japan and America. And for this, we have to go to 19th century Japan. Since 1868, Japan, under the rule of American Meiji, was rapidly moving towards economic and industrial development. The reason for this rapid modernization and militarization was that it did not want to come under the control of imperialist powers like America. Not only this, but it also wanted to become imperialist by equalizing the Western powers. Western powers were using their colonies in the Asia-Pacific to obtain natural resources and to sell their goods. In this way, Imperial Japan now had only one goal, and that was competition for colonies and territories with Western powers. This is where Japan's expansionist policy began, which increased its struggle with America. Especially when it came to China. America and Japan both wanted to seize Asia's key natural resources and Chinese markets. Therefore, for many years, both had their influence in Eastern Asia. But things changed in 1931. The most important event in Japanese imperialist ambitions was seen in 1931 when it invaded Manchuria. Manchuria is a fertile and resource-rich region of northeast China. Japan formed a puppet government in Manchuria, which America refused to recognize. Other Western powers also opposed this step of Japan, due to which it resigned from the League of Nations. But these events did not diminish Japan's ambitions, but only increased its frustrations. Japan's hatred for the United States began to grow in the same way as Hitler and Mussolini's hatred for the UK-led European powers. Anyway, On September 1940, Japan invaded French Indochina, that is, the French colonies of Southeast Asia. Its main objective was to close the arms and fuel supply routes of China. Although it was a limited occupation, it was a big step for Japan and its enemies. Not only this, but at the same time, on September 27, Japan also signed a tripartite agreement with fascist Germany and Italy. According to this agreement, these three Axis powers were going to provide all kinds of political, economic, and military aid to each other. After capturing French Indochina, it was such a decision that further increased the hostility between Japan and the United States. Friends, the attack on Pearl Harbor was the result of that Japanese frustration and desperation, whose roots are also in the economic crisis faced by it. And this crisis also started in America. Yes, we are talking about the Great Depression, which also caused a lot of damage to the Japanese economy. Let's see. The Great Depression and Japanese desperation. The rate at which Japan was industrializing, its domestic market and resources were declining. For economic welfare, it was now dependent on sea trade and its navy. In addition, the way China is an export-driven economy today, similarly, export was also a major driving force in the Japanese economy at that time. But due to the Great Depression, which lasted from 1929 to 1933, tariff barriers increased, and Japanese exports fell. On top of that, Japan was dependent on imports for energy in many essential raw materials. But due to a shortage in exports, its balance of payments also began to deteriorate. Japanese leaders were afraid that Japan's development would be stalled. To overcome this challenge, they began to imagine a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. According to Imperial Japan's idea, a self-contained empire was needed from China, Indochina, Thailand, Malaya, Manchuria to the Dutch East Indies. And Japan had entrusted itself with the responsibility of representing this greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. Soon, this sphere became a slogan against European imperialism and communist influence in Japan. In short, to overcome the economic crisis, imperialism became a weapon of Japan in the Pacific, and it began to expand. Friends, the attack on Pearl Harbor by Japan was the result of American reactionary policies. Let's see how. America's reactionary policies and sanctions. Friends, America did not accept Japan's expansionist and imperialist policies. Although the U.S. was not directly involved in World War II, but it was eager to defeat imperial powers such as Germany, Italy, and Japan in Europe and Asia. It took advantage of the fact that 80% of Japan's imports came from America. In response to Japanese aggression, in 1940, the U.S. government stopped the supply of scrap iron, steel, and aviation fuel. In the same year, American President Franklin D. Roosevelt shifted the U.S. Pacific Fleet to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, so that the Japanese Navy could be controlled. In January 1941, America stopped exporting war materials such as copper, brass, bronze, zinc, nickel, and potash to Japan. This was a big push for Japan's industries. In addition, Japan was also very dependent on the U.S. oil supply. 80% of its oil came from the U.S. But America froze Japan's financial assets so that it could not pay for oil supplies. It was like a de facto, i.e., unofficial ban. It also banned Dutch Indian oil companies from cooperating with Japan. Due to the Great Depression, the economic condition of Japan, which was going through an economic crisis, began to deteriorate. And in this frustration, it also attacked Pearl Harbor. Now let's move on to the failure of peace agreements. Failure of peace agreements. It was not that no peace agreement was discussed between Japan and America. Even after embargoes and asset freezes, there were multiple meetings between Japanese Ambassador Kichisaburo Nomura and U.S. Secretary of State Cordell Hull in Washington. But there were three areas in which there was no agreement. First, Japan's alliance with Germany and Italy. Second, Japan's imperialist idea of Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. And third, Japan's occupation of mainland China. Japan was only willing to move away from southern Indochina, but on the condition that the US, Britain and Netherlands stop helping China and take back the sanctions imposed on Japan. In response, America said that these conditions will only be accepted when Japan completely moves away from China and takes back the agreements made with Axis powers. And because of these conditions, peace discussions were stuck in a deadlock. Let's see what happened to this attack. Aftermath of the attack. Friends, immediately after this attack, Japan also attacked US and British bases in the Philippines, Guam, Midway Island, Wake Island, Malaya and Hong Kong. The very next day of the Pearl Harbor attack, President Roosevelt gave his famous Day of Infamy speech and declared war with the Empire of Japan. Under the alliance, Germany and Italy also declared war on the US on December 11. And America formally became a part of World War II. During the war, Japanese Americans living on the west coast of America were kept in separate camps. Pearl Harbor was often used for American propaganda. In fact, when America dropped a nuclear bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, it was also seen as a form of revenge. Conclusion. So friends, we saw how Japan's imperialist ambition, its desperation and its bad relations with America became the reason for the Pearl Harbor attack. Many historians believe that the attack on Pearl Harbor was unnecessary for Japan. Japan could have found alternatives for its raw materials and oil supply. He also misunderstood the U.S. intentions because America had no intention of joining the war directly in Europe or the Pacific. Some historians also question Roosevelt's intentions. They believe that Japan was incited to war by putting severe economic pressures on it. This was done so that America could declare war on Hitler's Germany under the pretext of war with Japan. However, the popular opinion is that Japan's desperation was the reason for its defeat in World War II. After the Pearl Harbor attack, it seemed as if it ruled the entire Pacific. But from a long-term view, Pearl Harbor was a grand strategic mistake for Japan. It was like waking up a sleeping lion. America's industrial capacity was such that no one could defeat it in this war. After the Pearl Harbor attack, Japan challenged the might of the American Navy, but the impact of such a surprise attack was only for a few days. Japan neither had the resources nor the strategy to stop the U.S. retaliation. Therefore, the Pearl Harbor attack proved to be a grand strategic mistake for Japan.